Jerry Seinfeld's famous stand-up routine about morning guy, night guy goes into detail about how he can never get enough sleep, and the night before he's like, oh, I'll stay up late because I feel like it, I want to have a good time. And then when he starts to think, oh, what about, how am I going to get by on 5 hours sleep? Well, he thinks, that's morning guy's problem. And then when morning guy wakes up the next day groggy and tired, he goes, damn you, night guy. There's a really good explanation for why people, not just Seinfeld, think like this. Hi, my name is Phil Whitby. I'm a developer at SwiftCase, and you're watching another one of my videos in my Bias in Business series, and this one is on projection bias. So where does projection bias come from? Well, a study from about 10 years ago demonstrated that people stopped saving money despite the fact that human lifespans are increasing. So even though we know that we're going to die later on, people aren't increasing the amount of saving to mitigate that, even though the retirement age has been increasing, which is a bit of a help. This study performed by a guy called Emma Hirschfeld, it looked at why people didn't increase their savings for the future. And part of the reason they discovered was that when people think about their future selves, the part of the brain that thinks about other people is engaged. So when we think about our future self, we think about that self as a stranger to ourselves. It turns out the closer in the future that we do think about ourselves, the more closely they are to ourselves. So there's kind of a diminishing return. So once you get past a certain point, that person is always a stranger to you. And you would never deny yourself to save for a complete stranger. So why would you do that for your future self? Another good example of this projection bias is when people like myself, and I'm sure you have, agree to do something in the far future. So, I might agree to that party or the barbecue or that dentist appointment 6 months down the line. But then when it comes to that time, I'm still just as busy or unavailable as I would have been this week or next week. But I imagine myself being a different person by then who has control over these things. And another good example is how people start smoking, and everyone starts smoking, including me, as a casual smoker, where you're taking one of somebody who already smokes. And at that point, when you take that cigarette, you always think of yourself in the future as being able to quit. But if you weren't able to say no then, why would you be able to say no 2 years or 3 years into the future? Well, because of projection bias. The absolute favourite, for example of this, is gym memberships. I think people spend money on something like a gym membership because they feel like that initial expense will compel your future self to go and use the gym. And it might work at the beginning, but it really, really doesn't work down the line. Another relevant aspect of rejection bias can be seen when you're shopping. And if you go into a supermarket and you're very hungry, you're more likely to buy, the snack foods with high in sugar and high in fat, because that would satiate you immediately. And you then buy more of those things because you imagine yourself in the future to be desiring them more often. A particularly good study prompted some workers to choose either a healthy or unhealthy snack for a later time at different times of the day. But when the workers were hungry, they would choose a much more unhealthy snack for their future selves compared to when they were less hungry. So when asked just after their breakfast, they were much more likely to choose a healthy snack for themselves later in that day. When asked just before lunch, they were much more likely to choose a cake or crisps or something like that. So what's the lesson from projection bias? Well, in a business sense, you can see how projection bias might cause you to extrapolate into the future that you'll have your current success, especially if you are successful. And this can cause you to take on unsuitable loans, more staff, because you imagine that things will continue exactly that way. I think a revealing example of how projection bias works is when you make a status-based decision about the future. Now, when a lot of people move home, they may move into a new neighbourhood and then start to compare themselves with the people around them. Now, when they were in their previous neighbourhood, they would compare themselves to people in that area and think to themselves, if only we moved to this neighbourhood, then we would be happy. But once you move to this new place, then you start to compare yourself to those around you, And these are now a different kind of people. Part of projection bias is this idea that you say, if I do this in the future, I will be happy. But every time you then move to a new place, the goalposts change, and you forget that. You do not take that into account when you project yourself in the future. And it's the same problem when people see other successful people, such as celebrities, and they think to themselves, if only I had their success, I could be happy. And more often than not, a celebrity will talk about fame and the trappings of fame as being something deeply negative to their overall mental health. Yet people will still feel that if they project themselves into a future where they have fame and riches, that they will be happy. And this kind of bias and this kind of delusion can affect your business in the same way. If only if I expand to this many people, if we just have a bigger office in a different location, then we'll be up there with the big boys, those sorts of ideas. My name's Phil. I hope you enjoyed my video on projection bias. I look forward to seeing you next time in my next video. If you've got any comments, please leave them below, and don't forget to hit subscribe. See you next time.